Welcome to Slight Reliability, learning SRE one day at a time. I'm Stephen Townsend. Hello and welcome back to Slight Reliability. I'm Stephen Townsend and this is the show where we learn SRE one day at a time. Today I am joined by special guests Stephen Gill and Gwen from IAG. They were my colleagues and Steve was my boss up until about 3 weeks ago. So welcome Steve and Gwen. I thought maybe to start you could do a little introduction about yourselves, starting with you, Steve.
Cool. Thanks, Stephen. Hi, I'm Steve. First of all, I'm going to introduce my dog Charlie because he's sat on my knee. This is Charlie, my 18-month-old cavoodle. He's wiggling all over me right now. He doesn't normally sit in here with me because he makes a lot of noise, but today we're gonna try him out, see how he gets on. I moved to New Zealand about 8 years ago and joined IAG as a SharePoint developer, which was an experience in itself. Good old SharePoint. Learned a lot during that phase. Then did a whole bunch more engineering roles across some of the digital teams and then the content management space as well. And about 3 years ago, joined the release and SRE team as the team lead. At that point, it was just the release team. And now, we've become the release and SRE team.
And Gwen, tell us a little bit about you and your career and your dog.
Sure. Yeah, of course, the dog is the most important. Hello, I am Gwen. I actually started off with a commerce degree and then came back to university to study computer science and then started the graduate program at IAG, which involved 3 rotations through the technology department and then landed a permanent role in the SRE team, in Steve's team. And have been here ever since. And dog. Just showing my dog lying behind me with his favorite door stopper.
For those of you listening on the audio only, we just saw a small snippet of a chunky lab. And before Charlie was a fluffy white cavoodle. And seeing as we're doing dogs, I'll just grab my dogs. This is Jarvis, 6-month-old cavoodle. And this is Magnus, also known as Magnoceros, who's a 1-year-old cavoodle. And there's the dogs. We had a chat a week ago. And I guess the initial concept behind having a chat was that we're part of this brand new SRE team trying to, figure out what that means and how we could do SRE stuff in a useful way in the organization. So I thought it was a nice opportunity to take a reflection on like our year in SRE and what we experienced and what we learned and what went well and what didn't go so well. First of all, Steve, how did the SRE team come about?
Well, it came about through, I guess, our old EM, Ian Phillips, and it was his idea to create an SRE incubation team so we could kind of go through, understand what SRE is, and then see how we could apply some of those concepts at IAG. It was kind of an understanding that we wouldn't be able to impart all of the goodness of SRE straight directly into IAG, but actually work through what works for us as an organisation and see how we can move that operational space forward.
And so when we started and the team today is an enablement team, is that right?
Yeah, we've kind of stuck to that largely. We have picked up a couple of platforms recently, but the intent is that we will sit and enable teams, and that includes working within teams directly and also creating content that teams can refer to as well.
Gwen, I was wondering what you thought about how would you describe our team, what our team culture was like or still is?
Yeah, I think it was from early on, we really needed to recognize that we were all launching into this new world of SRE, that there were a lot of unknowns, that we were all very new to the concepts, to the frameworks, to the tools, to kind of everything involved under this SRE umbrella, and getting comfortable with the unknowns in that respect. So there was a lot of learning in the early days, and I think that was both an exciting time, but also very nerve-wracking with kind of not knowing exactly what our focus would be as an SRE enablement team. But we did a lot of sharing among the team, and it was a very kind of safe, we promoted a lot of psychological safety within our team as well. So if we're finding something difficult, to talk back with the team, to share a lot of the learning that we were doing in those early days, and even now as well. I think we've kind of brought those things forward and become a lot more comfortable with, sharing our failures and learnings as we've gone on as well.
Yeah, I think we had a pretty unique, I guess you still do have a pretty unique situation in that you've got the space and time to experiment and to fail. And there were a couple of times that we completely pivoted, that we were doing something and realized this is just not working at all, that it's like completely different, which I think is it's important to be able to do that. Can either of you remember, like right in the early days, how did we start? Where did we begin? Like we formed the team, and I can't remember how we began. Like, did we go and read things online, or did we immediately jump into that first engagement and look into SLOs? I can't actually remember how it all happened.
I think from my point of view, I spent a bit of time before you both had joined the team as well, kind of reading about SRE and trying to understand the kind of key concepts within it, and thinking about how we could apply that and then what that would look like from our point of view as we're going forward. I think we kind of I had a bunch of reading for you to start with because I couldn't think of another way to do it. And then we had some discussions as well about what the sort of stuff that we could do was. And basically, I think it was Stephen, you and I talked a little bit about some of the things you'd seen at IG as well, or we thought some of that might fit together in this new space.
The first sort of major engagement that we did was with a platform team who hosts a Kubernetes platform, which many other teams in the organization host their services on. And they sort of initially, asked for some help around SLOs. And one of the things that we did to try and build some trust with them and to understand what they were doing was to embed in the team into some capacity. And Gwen, you did on call for that team. Do you want to tell us a little bit about like what was that like? It's essentially a junior engineer who wasn't familiar with their technology stack coming in and doing on call.
So that was a interesting experience, to say the least, a massive learning curve as well. I think just to provide some kind of context as well, initially when we embedded with this team, we were kind of still doing a little bit of our SRE work and building the team, whether that was the kind of SLO work we will talk about later in the podcast, or we also did a mini project where we tried to kind of replicate the Good Day project that they did at GitHub with a Slack bot. And then the other few days of the week, we were doing operations work within this high-performing DevOps team that managed the Kubernetes pairs. So my role involved kind of picking up onboarding tasks, learning the technology stack, and this went on for a few months. And then in early 2022, early this year, I was added into the on-call support squad for a month. I think it consisted of 4 of us. And I had done bits and pieces over the past few months with this ops work, but this on-call for the month was a completely different level. I was still very junior in my role. I'd only been in technology for like a couple of years, and before that was the graduate program. So I'd been kind of working across so many different disciplines within this world of technology. In this instance, I barely knew the stack, and I barely even knew what we're doing in SRE as well. It was very overwhelming. This on-call work was a lot about kind of firefighting. So as soon as an issue came up, then we would try and resolve it. A lot of the issues that came up were things that had not been documented before, that we didn't even know how to deal with. And for me, not even being familiar with the platform, it was really tricky to kind of resolve a lot of those issues that came up. So for me, it was kind of like I was literally counting down the days for when this on-call would end. It was definitely very stressful. But I think on the bright side, reflecting back, at the end of this on-call work, my perspective really shifted. I'd never done anything like this before. And even though I saw a need for SRE, I didn't really value it in the way that I did after this on-call work and this engagement. And I really saw the value that the SRE work can add to a high-performing team like this, or any other team. Really.
So maybe the best way to promote SRE is to get someone to go and be on call on a non-trivial service or system application.
Yeah, I would say so. I think a lot of SREs also come to this role kind of later on in their career when they've gone through a lot of this work or been a developer or engineer or tester in another discipline. So coming into it as a junior, I think it's really important to kind of have that exposure to this other work so that you can add value as an SRE as well.
So I was going to say, yeah, I think it was really important for you to get that experience of doing the on-call support, having not done that before. I think otherwise trying to guide and help teams when you haven't done something is very difficult to do. And you haven't, unless you spent a day in their shoes, it's kind of hard to understand what the difficulties are and the pressures and the time that you need to spend to do that kind of work is. So although I think it was a really difficult experience and one which I would change kind of the way we'd approach it in the future based on your feedback, I do think it was a great learning opportunity.
Do you think it's possible for junior engineers to be on call? And how would you do it differently in the future?
I think you can have junior engineers on call, but when they're paired with a more senior engineer, basically, because I think they need that level of support and to get to that level of comfort where you can be there and to answer those questions individually. I think next time I would, I guess, think more about how the team that you're going into can support you doing that as well. I thought we could have probably onboarded you into that team a little bit better and given you some more context around the systems as well. So there was a bit of a knowledge gap that you had, which made that an even more difficult process than it probably needed to be.
I completely agree that I think a lot of the struggles that I had was that knowledge gap. And looking back now, I feel like if I did that again a year on, then it would be a completely different experience after all of the work and learning that we've done over the past 12 months.
I think I was just going to say, it links back into the previous interview I did with Kyle Forster and Shay Stewart from Runwen, and they were talking about this whole idea of social reliability engineering, where you can create essentially like a Google Street or Google driving directions for your technology stack, and each part of the stack, each service or component, there are a set of instructions for dealing with different incidents, like automated things you can run to resolve things, which is kind of the approach that Google does, but applied across multiple organizations all working together. There's a link there, and they are trying to solve that problem of how do we get junior engineers on call faster.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? There's not a set way to do that. A lot depends on the person as well. I think you have to be quite adaptive to what that person's capabilities are, and then kind of tailor that onboarding to them depending on where they previously had experience or feel that they need more support.
I think from kind of a bit more of an SRE lens, there are a few things that I would definitely change to make the on-call experience different as well. One of the things that we really pushed for during that time was around documentation. And ensuring that a lot of the work and issues that they deal with were documented so that if a senior engineer wasn't available, for example, then juniors could refer back to it and having that really strong knowledge base. And then I think another big thing is monitoring and alerting and catching those issues before the customers, the application teams raise them as well. And so that you can actually be aware of it, learn about what you need to do, and take action.
While Gwen, you were doing on-call and having all the stress, I instead was, this team asked us to look into SLOs. And so I spent all this time going online trying to figure out what the heck are SLOs, how are they valuable, how do you define them? And then we created this gigantic Miro board and ran a workshop with them and tried to, it was quite theoretical. And we were trying to figure out, for this platform, what are the services they provide and the different user groups that they cater to, and what are the key indicators of whether they're getting the experience they want and all that kind of stuff. And it just kind of didn't work. It kind of fell flat. I think that it was too theoretical. And if I did it again, I think we'd have a much simpler start and just say, let's understand the platform, the services, and the users, and then say, well, what are the key things, just focusing maybe on availability and latency to make sure that, we're giving these customers the level of service that we want to give them, but then not set a threshold, just go and measure those indicators for a while, for like 3 months, and get a sense of this is where we are today. Is it good enough or not? If it's not, we need to do something. If it's good enough, let's set an SLO around it. And you came into that process, the SLO workshopping process, Gwen, sort of halfway through after you'd finished your on-call work and sort of took the lead on that. what was your experience trying to implement SLOs, and what do you think that we and the team gained from that experience, even though we didn't come up with great SLOs and adopt them and set era budgets?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's the learning around it as well. I think SLOs is kind of like a buzzword. They're a seemingly simple concept to employ within a team, within a platform. But I think coming into it kind of halfway through, it was anything but. There were so many different ideas and opinions around the best way to implement SLOs and even what they are. I know that Stephen did a lot of work, and a lot of it was quite theoretical as well. So I tried to come into it from a simplification lens and to see if we could actually just break it down and make it a little bit more straightforward through the workshop. But then again, we ran a trial with that kind of seemingly simplified version and got blocked again kind of partway through as we were trying to run that workshop.
So we tried the SLO workshopping. We didn't actually define a lot of meaningful SLOs that got taken and used for era budgets, which we sort of, so I've explained in previous episodes a little bit about that. But then we decided to do something completely different, and we pivoted because we realized it wasn't providing outcomes, and we did this reliability benchmarking work. And before we talk about that, I was wondering, Steve, how do you know when to pivot? How do you know when you there's that whole sunk cost fallacy where you're like, well, I've spent so much time doing this, I've got to get to the end. How do you know when to let it go?
I think it varies from example to example, right? I think in this case, it was the fact we weren't really making progress towards our goals. So we weren't really helping teams to either understand their availability currently or to measure and alert against that either. We just kind of got a little bit stuck in a rut. We tried a couple of variations of that kind of that Miro board with the SLOs on there, and nothing really worked. And for me, it was just like, okay, we're not going anywhere here. We're just kind of like spinning our wheels. So what else could we do, and what else could we move on to try and actually get this working? And I guess previously I'd done some work on their software delivery and operational performance metrics from Dora. And what we'd always done there was to kind of benchmark to start with, to say where you're at now, and then look for areas of improvement. I felt like that was a nice pivot to make here, so we could actually at least provide some value, so we can show them kind of what's happening in their production system now, and then look to see how we can improve on that afterwards.
I did that initial benchmark with a team, and it was a team who has a public-facing website which people can do insurance quotes from, and we looked at like 8 lenses to start with, and they were the 4 golden signals plus some more. So we had error rate, availability, latency, traffic, and then we looked at things like frequency of deployments as well. The kind of SDO mixed with golden signals, really, and a bit of customer context as well. And had to go out to different tools. So we went to New Relic and Splunk and Prometheus and ServiceNow for incident data, because we wanted to track incidents as well, and put it all together. And I think it went quite well. I think that the team received it really well. It was engaging. We provided them opportunities that we surfaced, and we said, hey, this is an opportunity. We've observed a thing. This is happening. How can we improve this? And that was really cool. I think that the 2 main findings were, the first one was they were having like millions of JavaScript errors in the customer browsers constantly happening. And the second one was they were having 2 or 3 P3 or P4 incidents every single day. And most of them weren't because of technical issues, but because a business rule failed, preventing a customer from getting a quote. Customer calls up. Call center didn't realize it was a business rule failing and raises a technical incident ticket. So that was interesting. A complete mismatch of communication. Maybe some training was required, better documentation.
I really enjoyed that dashboard as well, in that you brought in a lot of different types of information there for them to look at and use. I think that's kind of that bigger concept of observability we've touched on in the past, breaking away from just logs, traces, and metrics, but to actually look at other things that impacts the customers. I think that was a really insightful thing to have done in there.
I think it was a very good way to start that SRE conversation, because you are kind of offering some tangible value to them up front rather than just talking about asking them to do everything for you. Okay, so after the reliability benchmark, it was quite a manual process. We wanted to streamline and automate it. Can you tell us a bit about what we did there, Gwen?
Yeah, so as Stephen was saying, it was quite a manual task pulling in data from multiple tools and sources to formulate this reliability benchmarking assessment. And we ended up doing a few spikes on different tools, and in the end found that Grafana seemed like the best solution for what we needed, and particularly that if you pay for the enterprise version, you can use the plugins for all of the tools that we had and that we're pulling in data from, like New Relic, Splunk, ServiceNow, and Prometheus. And it just seemed like the best solution at the time, that we could have kind of that centralized observability platform for teams to use and for us to help enable teams as well. So in terms of the technology, we started running it locally and then on a Linux server. From there, we really wanted to containerize the tools and kind of follow SRE principles and make the tools easier to manage and maintain long term, along with also learning the technology, because this was a really important component for us. We then deployed Grafana and Prometheus on another Kubernetes platform, not the first one that we were talking about, our first engagement, just in case they wanted their monitoring there as well, so that we could separate the two. And then more recently, we've also been building a deployment pipeline through GitHub Actions as well, which gave us the opportunity to VSM the process and look at some threat mitigation, which we can also apply to other teams that we enable as well. So this whole process has not just been the best way that we can build this observability platform, but also really about the learning for us as SREs, and also I think that's the benefit of our incubator team, is that we can trial these different concepts and tools so that we can better enable other teams within our company as well.
We were talking about being able to pivot in the past, and one of the things that you didn't mention is that we set out to build this like first pane of glass, single pane of glass view, and the first team that we talked to wanted us to also store their metrics. So we went on this whole big journey of trying to implement different solutions to how we might do that, because they wanted to store their metrics for over a year. And so we looked at this open source product called Mimir, which is brand new, and we spent like 3 months trying to implement it and just not being able to get it to work on premise. And then one day we sort of finally realized, you know what, this wasn't the original value proposition for the observability platform, and we decided to stop doing that and just go back to what we originally set out to do. And that was quite hard to, I mean, for me anyway, to let go, because we spent so much time trying to get it to work, and then just to say, you know what, let's walk away.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, again, like, it's not just that we learnt about the tool Mimir, it was also that we learnt how to manage that kind of storage, how to set up those integrations, and also learn about like other technologies like Helm charts and deploying that way as well. So it wasn't just the tool itself. It was kind of, I actually wrote a mini presentation called Mimir, a short story, because it was quite a journey that we went on before we scrapped using it. Yeah.
So Steve, more recently, I was only involved in one of them, but we started running game days and trying some sort of chaos engineering type stuff. I've heard the term Wheel of Misfortune before as well. Have you done any more game days since then?
Not since then, no. We kind of paused waiting until we've got a couple of new starters coming on board. I actually think that would be a nice thing to do with them once they kind of have some general understanding of the system, to get them involved in some game days, to give them that real kind of learning opportunity that the both of you had when we were standing up the system. Yeah, I really enjoyed the game days from my perspective, kind of watching the team work out what the issues were, and then spotting the different gaps within our processes as well, and some of our own gaps in our observability and monitoring that we hadn't quite got everything as expected. Yeah, a really eye-opening experience for me. I don't know how you feel about it, Stephen.
I thought it was great, and especially so on that particular game day, I was the one who introduced the problem, and I in our Kubernetes config, I put the wrong name for a container image, I think. I just added an extra letter. I think that's what it was. And then we got our sort of junior engineer to run the handling the incident, and he got there. He actually did get there, which showed that although we weren't very experienced at dealing with incidents, we had enough frameworking around it for him, to actually go and solve the problem. And we learned a lot. There were a lot of gaps in our process, in our documentation, in our monitoring, and there's so many things you could take away from that and improve and be better as a result of that. So for the SRE team, now that I've left, Obviously, things are so much better that I've left. But what are the next steps for the team? What's coming up? What initiatives are you working on? Where would you like to see the team and what you've done in the next 12 months?
So I guess there's a couple of things that we're really starting to focus on now, which is the observability kind of end-to-end of our key value streams for our customers. That's something we haven't typically done particularly well, and especially outside of production as well, we don't really have the right synthetics in place to understand what's happening in there. And that stems partly from our organizational structure and some of the complexity that we have in our kind of core systems. But I think it's something we can do better and really try and put a focus on that customer experience. So that's something we're going to kind of lead into. And the other big piece is around, we're just in the process of acquiring a new feature management tool. And that's something that we've noticed that across teams, we kind of do it inconsistently. We've got a few teams that have written their own bits of software, but we're not able to do that across features which span a number of applications or services. So we're really looking to build into that at the moment and to improve that feature management piece. I think this is something we touched a little bit on before, but obviously we set out the intent to be an enablement team, but we've kind of become an enablement and platform team. And I've been giving some thought to whether that's actually suitable for us going forward. There's definite disadvantages to doing that around the amount of cognitive load that we'd have. And I wonder, if we are best placed to continue to build and run platforms, or we should switch to complete enablement. I think that's something we'll work through over the next few months, really, to see what that looks like.
Would you consider standing up or having two SRE teams, one who just focus on the platforms, another which focuses on the enablement?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. Within our kind of larger engineering excellence team, we already have some platform teams, so maybe working out with them how the best way to do is to support this as well, so we can give the most value back to the customers that we have. I think that's something we'll probably have to do a little bit of experimentation around as well, because I don't think it's particularly clear what will work best at this stage.
And what are you looking forward to in the next year, Gwen?
I think talking about our observability platform that we were looking at before, I can see so much value that we can add to teams by implementing their monitoring in the centralized place. We've just started a new engagement with the team actually, and they have their monitoring kind of scattered across multiple tools. And there is a very exciting opportunity to uplift their observability, bring it into our observability platform, and also identify some kind of gaps and opportunities that would really help this team to do their jobs better as well. And I'm excited to kind of move forward with that and really see where that takes us.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Steve and Gwen, for coming on the show. I would love to check in maybe in a year's time and see what's been happening in the SRE team at IAG, if you're willing to come back on the show.
Sounds great.
That's all for another episode of Site Reliability. Thanks once again for tuning in, and I will see you all next time.